Our screens this week have been dominated by the beginnings of a running story which is going to go on running for the rest of my life and maybe yours too, that of Britain's future king and queen. On Tuesday afternoon, the gentlemen and ladies of the press and broadcasting descended on Buckingham Palace to snap the Prince and Lady Diana in a variety of poses. Even on one occasion persuading the Prince, who was about the same height as his fiancée, to climb one step higher to make a better picture. And Kate Adie was surprised to find, among the goofers outside the palace gates, an unexpected shutter fiend in the shape of the 8th Earl Spencer.
And we've got some people also over... Well,
hello,
can I say congratulations?
Thank you very much.
Earl Spencer himself.
Very proud and very happy.
What are you doing?
Very proud, very happy.
What are you doing on the pavement outside the palace? I thought you'd be inside.
I'm photographing the photographers.
Well, what a marvellous day for you today.
Lovely day. We're all very happy. I saw Diana last night. She's looking absolutely radiant. Radiant, very happy. I've never seen her look better. I've photographed every event in her life. I'm photographing this one too.
Well, you can see that you're very much in the centre of attention now, your whole family.
Very nice to see everyone here. Very nice to see everybody here. I'm sure they'll all be as happy as she is. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Those hopeful of receiving invitations to the wedding may have got some bright ideas from that evening's fascinating omnibus on BBC One, when Jana Bokova filmed in the Neiman Marcus department store in JR's hometown, an unusual shopping place for passing millionaires.
Then we have this here after-dinner toothpaste. Now, this is really fantastic.
Really nice.
It really is. A really extraordinary gift. And...
Does this go with it?
Oh, no. Well, you could buy it as an extra. It's a 24-karat gold toothbrush. And, of course, if you wanted to give it as a gift, you could give it together.
A more straightforward arts programme was Saturday's Arena on the American artist Edward Hopper, which the Times described as dull, one reason no doubt being that too much emphasis was placed on filming streets and pictures in New York and perhaps not enough on organising decent stills. In the world of the great outside, Julian Pettifer started a 13-part series for ATV on nature, while The World About Us on BBC Two gave us a portrait of the willow and its place in the Somerset wetlands. And in Assault on Everest 1933, the last of that splendid series Travellers in Time, the careful dubbing on of sound effects nearly 50 years after the event, tents flapping in the wind, feet crunching in the snow, muffled conversation, brought the triumphs and setbacks of that unsuccessful expedition marvellously to life. On the geriatric front, Thames gave us a sympathetic portrait of that saintly man Basil Hume, Cardinal of Westminster, whom some, but not many, think of as a future pope. While over on BBC Two, another latter-day saint in the shape of Malcolm Muggeridge launched a survey of his life and times with a rerun of a 15-year-old film he'd made about his Croydon childhood. Had he been making this today, the commentary would, I think, have been a good deal more lively. In drama, there was a return of the Whitehall situation comedy Yes, Minister, while BBC Two presented us with a play set in South Africa, The Jail Diary of Albie Sachs. Peter McHenry was Albie Sachs, and Stratford Johns returned to television as a bigoted yet not unattractive prison officer.
Oh, Mr. Seymour. I do have one request.
What is it?
At Maitland's,
For the last time.
they did let me have a Bible.
Bible. You read the Bible.
Yes, I do.
You understand it, do you?
Well, I'm learning a great deal. Of course, there are things at first that I find hard to understand.
Well, that is to be expected. The Bible needs a lot of study. As it so happens, I have studied it myself for over 20 years. You could say I am something of an expert on the Bible.
Later in the programme, I'll be discussing with Roy Langridge, media director of the advertising agency J. Walter Thompson, the advertising industry's concern about ITV's falling viewing figures. But first, three of this week's programmes. Monday's Panorama on the security services, the last two episodes of the current series of comprehensive school drama Grange Hill, also on BBC One, and Wednesday's ITV documentary with the writer James Baldwin, I Heard It Through the Grapevine. And with me to discuss these programmes are Liz Forgan, women's editor of The Guardian, soon to be a commissioning editor of Channel 4, Bernard Ashley, a junior school headmaster, and himself a writer of children's books, one of which is currently a BBC serial, Break in the Sun, and the New Statesman journalist Christopher Hitchens. First, Panorama, which after one or two publicly aired hiccups, this week presented the first of a two-part series on Britain's security services. The second part in this coming Monday, and we'll look at MI5's and special branches' monitoring of subversives and the question of individual privacy. The theme of this week's programme was the security services' lack of public accountability, unlike the United States, where, after Watergate, public accountability was established. Also, again unlike the United States, the overall and to some excessive secrecy concerning every aspect of our security services.
Greater public accountability of MI6 to Parliament might ventilate the sensitive issue of the use by the Secret Intelligence Service of occasional agents and part-time operators who can and invariably are disowned if revealed or if anything goes wrong. Some are men who persistently work in the twilight zone of intelligence gathering, where deception and lying are rated as tradecraft qualifications. Some have criminal records. We retain a journalistic skepticism about their stories, but because the use made of men like this bears directly on the issue of greater public accountability for British intelligence, we have listened to a couple of such operators. One of them is a man called Lee Tracy.
And we can take a normal tape cassette such as this, a compact cassette, which we would put into...
He says he used to work for MI6 as a technician, then left to start his own electronics business while maintaining mercenary links with the intelligence world. He's brushed with the law in the past, and although it's just not possible to check all his claims, some are true, others seem to be true. He represents perhaps an ugly but unavoidable part of undercover work.
4, and we'll see whether or not that makes contact. The fact that 1 or 2 are even killed or get lost or become wet jobs, does it mean that you must destroy a very good system that works just because now and again it hiccups?
What is a wet job?
When somebody's eliminated.
That's what it's actually called?
Yes.
Has your department ever done wet jobs?
Oh, I wouldn't answer that if I knew.
And you do know, but you don't want to answer it.
Liz Forgan, your opinion of that film on the security services?
Yes, it's a great pity after all the fuss that in fact what we saw on the screen I thought was an awful disappointment. Things were taken out of that film. Quite how much exactly I don't know, but we can't talk about that. All we can talk about is what we actually saw.
Well, I can tell you that very little in fact was taken out.
Well, what we saw was really nothing new to anybody who's been reading newspapers seriously over the last few years. And it wandered around and meandered the film. It raised all the questions, but it's easy to think of the questions. We all want to know whether the security services murder foreign statesmen or listen to our telephones. They are hard questions to answer, and it's a hard subject to tackle. And I've got the greatest respect for Tom Mangold as a reporter. But though I'm glad he tried it, I think in this case it didn't succeed. It's hard to deal with spies because the respectable spies, the good spies, won't talk to you. You have to talk to whoever's available, and the ones that are available tend not always to be the most useful witnesses. But watching that programme, the best bits of it were the stuff that came from America. Because in America, as you said, after Watergate, certain things have had to be unleashed. And we now have the curious situation where any member of the public in America now, in theory, has available to them information which a British MP cannot ask for here. If they had made the whole programme in America, looked at from there, I think we'd have ended up with no less information, certainly, possibly even a little more, and it would more elegantly have made the point that they set out to make, which is that the British security services are almost entirely not subject to public scrutiny of any kind, and that we could do a lot more here quite safely to see that they were.
Christopher Hitchens?
Yeah, well, I thought it was as dull as rain, and Mangold isn't a dull reporter at all, not a boring guy. And the issue is very simple, really, and yet he had to keep on apologising for himself. I mean, he kept having to say, well, here's this man, Lee Tracy, you know, it wasn't nice having to go and talk to him, but we did it for you. And then, you know, rather insultingly, although I don't think Tracy is a very nice man, they proceeded to sort of put him on. Then they threw away various other people. I mean, Frank Snepp is not just an ex-CIA man. He ran the CIA in South Vietnam at the crucial time. He probably voted for Reagan a few weeks ago as well. They didn't introduce him. He wasn't presented, nor was Senator Jake Garn, who's a very important politician now, coming man. When Snepp says he's not Philip Agee, it's not explained what he means by that. So, except for when they were disowning their task as journalists, they hardly took any time to explain themselves at all. And the issue is, you know, one of really, are the security services protecting us from the Russians, or are they a dirty tricks group for the establishment? And is it unpatriotic to ask this question?
Yeah, if I could interrupt you, it seemed to me that what the programme was about was should there or should there not be greater public accountability of the security services, bearing in mind what is now the form in America. Now, don't you think that question was posed and is an interesting one?
In a very oblique way, I think it was posed. But it was posed in, well, I've said apologetic, almost a grovelling way.
Bernard Ashley, do you think that Tom Mangold was being, as Christopher Hitchens has said, apologetic?
I think he was apologetic. He was also oblique. I agree with that. I found that although he set out to give us subject headings, and the subject headings were backed up by the flats saying MI5, MI6, GCHQ, in fact, when he got into it, he partly described and then partly criticised in each of the sections. And I think I'd have found it much easier to follow through as a programme had he dealt with one at a time, described the work, then talked about the reasons for us to feel dissatisfied or to ask questions about what's going on, and then finally to bring in the interviews where people had some of the answers. For example, the David Owen's suggestion that there should be a group of Privy Councillors who do have access to this sort of thing on our behalf, although heaven help us if somebody as naive as David Owen is one of those, because it did seem that the wool had been pulled completely over his eyes anyway.
Well, he was suggesting, I think, that there should be a small committee which should be able to question the Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary and the Home Secretary. I mean, did that seem a sensible idea to you?
Certainly, yes.
Why not?
I mean, I want to be protected from the Russians by these people. And what I want to know is whether they're doing that or whether they are protecting the establishment from inquiry. Because, in fact, whenever the Russians seem to have had a rather larger hand in the work of the security services in this country than the British people have. And, you know, I don't think one needs to be too tame about saying that's a cause of concern.
Well, now we change to a rather different subject, which is Grange Hill, a tale of adenoidal boys and girls in a North London comprehensive school, and with a viewing audience of around 10 millions, one of the most successful children's programmes ever. This week, the programme entered its 4th series. A 5th is planned, and there's also to be a feature film. The popularity of the series lies in the frankness with which it deals with such subjects as bullying, sex education, corporal punishment, boys' crushes on women teachers, and girls' problems with their first bras. The differences between the school's treatment of boys and girls was the main theme of yesterday's edition.
What was all that about?
Nosy, aren't you?
That's why I asked.
We've got to miss hockey because the boys want to play their interform final on our pitch.
What's wrong with their own?
The groundsman's doing something to it.
Oh, typical, that is. Why can't they miss their stupid final?
Because they're the boys, aren't they? Can I see? You going to wear school uniform next year?
I ain't got much choice, have I? Anyway, I've had enough aggro trying to let him make me do a technical drawing.
I thought all options had to be chosen by now.
I have. Better give me till after the holidays to think it over. I think I'm going to change my mind, but I ain't.
Bernard Ashley, what, as a school teacher yourself, did you think of Grange Hill?
Well, Grange Hill's a story, and story has various functions. It entertains. It gives us the opportunity to identify with characters. It gives us the opportunity to understand something about others and to safely experience something which we can do at second hand. And Grange Hill, on the first 2 of those counts, on entertaining and on providing identification, I think certainly succeeds. It's enormously popular. It's viewed by 10 million children, is it, every week, or a combination of children and adults. Very, very popular, and I think quite rightly so. However, although the acting is very good, I think the children are marvellously natural actors. Although the direction is very good and the camera angles are subtly taken from children's point of view, although much of the dialogue is extremely well written. For instance, Tucker Jenkins in one episode shows this sort of difference between in the adolescent boy between the sophisticated and the naive, when he says at one moment, when he's left alone with a girl, "It's you and me, babe," and the rest of the evening's free. And then the next moment he's saying to another girl who's a bit moody, oh, it must be the end of the month, and, you know, just slightly got it all wrong. Although all that is very good, I've found the series as a whole, because I've watched the whole series, very uneven. And it falls into three categories, really. There's the sort of comic strip Grange Hill, which we saw this week, both episodes, very much like the opening titles. Oversimplified, a very child-oriented point of view of what adults might do. Then there are the, what I would call between happenings bits of the drama, the corridor incidents, which a lot of Grange Hill is concerned with, which is always between other points of other people's lives. And so you don't really feel that the central thing that all the children are likely to be worried about is whether they can eat their tuck here or whether they're going to wear school uniform. I think there are much greater pressures on lots of children. And the third sort of programme, which has a very strong storyline, is very often on film, because it happens to get out into the community. And I think when Grange Hill gets out into the community, it's very much more successful. And although children, I'm a head of a junior school.
Could we come back to you in a moment?
Sorry.
See, Liz Forgan?
Well, I've only seen 3 episodes of Grange Hill, especially for this programme, because I'm a bit out of the age group, so I've been watching it specially. And I must say I found it an absolute joy. People had warned me that it was dangerously violent, and others had warned me that it was a stereotypic view of young children, and that may indeed be so. But I mean, for me, and I'm sure that I'm not the person that they made the programme for, I found it an absolute delight. I laughed at the jokes. I thought yesterday's episode with the embryo feminist trying to persuade her lumpish fellow girl pupils to be interested in the fight for technical drawing, which none of them wanted to do, and ending in exasperation by saying to them, it's like talking to the Muppets talking to you. It was funny. I loved it. It was great fun.
You must be Miss Piggy.
Yes, that's right. And deeply moral, a sort of Angela Brazil with a North London accent. I thought it was splendid.
Christopher?
I thought that the dialogue was very, very poorly done. Didn't convey any sense at all of how lively children's talk is, especially multiracial jive talk of the kind you hear a lot now. Even if one goes as an invited guest to talk at a school, let alone what one hears on the underground and elsewhere. I thought all that was absent, and it made it very flat, and thus, in that absence, they have to contrive awful little situations and awful little bits of dialogue.
And how do you account, Christopher, for the fact that you may think this, it has got a massive audience and is greatly enjoyed by school children all over the country?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know why that is, and I confess I'm baffled.
It's because it's funny.
I think maybe it's funny. There's a bit of cheek and so forth. Also, people are very narcissistic about television. They like to see things they can imagine themselves doing or their own arrangements transmitted, and you know that it makes for jokes and so forth. But there isn't enough sex or violence or obscenity in it, really. And my stirring call to the makers of the next series is that there should be a lot more of all that. Otherwise, they'll get nowhere near what life is like for kids in North London at the moment.
Yeah, well, I've just been got at by the lady who did the makeup, who said, you know, I have a 7-year-old and she will watch it and it's awful and it's terrible and it's giving her all the wrong sorts of ideas. I don't think so. I think that when children are old enough to understand some of the problems that are being dealt with in the programme, and really, Christopher, they do. There are lots of things which are almost brought in as medicine, like menstruation and so on, in an episode about medicals, which was a failure because there was no story.
Well, none of
but
that at my school.
these, no, probably not. But these issues are dealt with, and it's very good that children should see things which concern them day by day being discussed on television in the form of drama.
Thank you very much. Well, now for the third item, we'll turn to the ATV documentary I Heard It Through the Grapevine, which followed the black American writer James Baldwin on his first visit to the American South since the civil rights movement of the 1960s, and finding, as sometimes happens, that the more things change, the more they remain the same. It was an episodic and I thought somewhat confusing film, with visits to Atlanta, Birmingham, Selma, New Orleans, and then New York, with Baldwin making most of his comments while sitting on a kind of brass throne to his brother David. At the end of the film, Baldwin was in St. Augustine, Florida, where the first slave market took place, and where, with the African author Chinua Achebe, he attended a black writers' conference. As Baldwin spoke, a message interrupted the public address system, threatening his life.
I don't quite know what that interference is, and I suppose the best thing to do is to ignore. And the voice said, Mr. Baldwin, we can't have no talk like that. And everyone was stunned. And I just repeated what I'd said, you know. Mr. Baldwin is nevertheless going to finish his opening statement, and I will tell you now, whoever you are, and if you assassinate me in the next 2 minutes, I am telling you this. It no longer matters what you think. The doctrine of white supremacy in which the Western world is based has had its hour, has had its day, is over.
Christopher Hitchens.
Well, I like to think it takes a lot to make me cry, and all journalists like to feel hard-boiled about this sort of thing. But it did bring a real lump into my throat, that film, especially the old sequences from Selma and the big civil rights battles. Were really, really wonderful, and I thought that Dick Fontaine's film craft, you know, really does deserve praise. And I could have watched a lot more of it, but I found it in the end a little soft-centered. Baldwin never has to take the stand. I mean, they use his wonderful voice, which sounds like sort of brandy being poured over treacle into some cocktail, you know, very well. But they don't give him any hard questions, and they don't give his brother, who helped to make it, any hard questions either. And finally, it's a rather inconclusive film. And I decided that the thing they had failed to imagine or approach was this. Religion was really the keynote of the film. Their churches had brought them together for the first phase of the struggle. It was still around the church and around religion they were organizing themselves and grouping themselves and giving that solidarity. I feel that somewhere in there, in the religiousness of the American black, is some of the answer to why they haven't gone any further than they got in the first wave. At any rate, it would have been a discussion worth pursuing. It didn't come up at all. You were just invited to admire Fred Shuttleworth then as now. Admirable guy, but I knew that already.
Did you feel, as I did, that there weren't really enough signposts, that you needed, if not a front man, you needed a rather better guide than you got as to where you were going, when and why?
Yes, but Baldwin was himself trying to find out. He wasn't saying, look, come with me and I'll take you and show you and I know the way. He was trying to find his own way back. And I thought that ambivalence was good because it kept you waiting around and he was waiting around and you shared his confusion. That's all right. I mean, it didn't need to be didactic in that way. But at the end, he ought to have been grilled a little on what he felt he'd found out.
Liz Forgan.
I agree with you. I didn't just have a lump in my throat. I had tears rolling down my cheeks when I saw little young Ben Chasey at his brother's funeral and heard later that he was wanted by the police for murdering a white man. But what that film set out to tell you, apart from the old 60s civil rights films, was to say it is just the same now, nothing has changed. The buses may be desegregated, but America is the same. And Baldwin never produced any evidence whatever of that. You saw Reagan on the television screens in the background, so you knew that Reagan was president, and that was supposed to mean something. You saw blocks of hideous, terrible flats that had been built for the blacks in Newark, when Baldwin says, that is not a housing project, that's a reservation. And you saw the voice interrupting him at the end, the clip we've just seen. That was all the evidence he produced, except for old civil rights workers saying again and again, we got it all wrong, nothing's changed, it's all the same. That's what I wanted to see more of.
Bernard?
Well, I couldn't quite make out why Baldwin, in fact, had done this film, because I found it hard, really, to understand quite what his role had been, and that's my ignorance. There was a shot of him when he said, I'm here to bring the press. And there you saw him on film, on the steps of a town hall somewhere. And I fancy that now, this is what this film was about. He's there to take the press. Perhaps mistakenly, because to my mind, quite apart from anything that happens to society as a whole and the large movements, everybody has to grow up individually. And the point about Baldwin, for me, in his writing, is that he is helping us in the sort of way I mentioned about Grange Hill. He is helping people in their own growth. He's very much an individual writer. And while things like Going to Meet the Man very accurately reflect the hangings from the trees and the electric prod and so on that he writes about. Nevertheless, I think he is an individual. And while Martin Luther King can affect millions in one go, Baldwin is very much, as a writer, an individual worker. And therefore, the point of that film, to me, was a bit lost in having him doing it.
What did you think about his statement at the end that the Western world had had its day and it was white supremacy was over? What did you think about
It's
that?
either self-evident, which it is in the sense that there are no more southern Rhodesias around, and good thing too, or it means nothing. I mean, you know, in what sense is it white
He wasn't talking about Southern
supremacy?
Rhodesia, he was talking about you, us, now.
Well,
Western, white, liberal democracies, that's what
we've
he was
all
talking
been, yeah,
about.
but I mean, we've all had the experience of being turned on and told that we're just, you know, concerned honkies and liberal, you know, fakers and so forth. And I mind who's asking me that question, actually, and I don't think Baldwin's quite shown me that living in Saint-Tropez and writing articles called Notes from the House of Bondage, that he's going to quite pull it off, which is what he did the other day. Similarly, when he says, you know, okay and easy things like, well, prosperity and technology can become another barrier, you know, well, they can also become tremendously liberating. I mean, the South is now quite prosperous since they got rid of the stupid feta on production that was segregation. And, you know, when they aggregate the figures, people are better off, and they should be more proud of what they've done.
Just very quickly, did you find you could hear everything in that film? Was the sound quite clear to all of you?
I found some difficulty in understanding quite who was speaking at times. And
So did I. Did you find that?
It took me time at the beginning. It was an idiom you got into. I mean, it was James Baldwin, so I was ready to do almost anything, and I was used to the style being different, and it was all right in the end.
Liz Forgan, Christopher Hitchens, Bernard Ashley, thank you all very much. In 1979, ITV